my supervisors were teaching a course at Paul Smith's on brewing. And what that meant was that they got to trek out to Lake Placid a couple of times a month, and I think it was once a week at that point, and teach their course, and then go hang out at Lake Placid Pub and Brewery and drink ubu and have a great time while I was, meanwhile, holding down the fort. And I had this 15-hour long day of kegging, start to finish, set up, do the kegging, warehouse it, clean CIP everything.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to All Beer Inside. Joining me today is Alexandre of Golden Rule Mead.
Hi, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much for hosting us today and speaking about your meadery and your house, from what I could tell. So I'm looking forward to it. You've got some tasty looking meads here for me to try. What am I going to be starting with?
I think we'll start with Wild Light.
Okay.
It's maybe not what a lot of people would expect from mead. Getting into it, mead, of course, honey-based beverage, like beer, wine, or cider. But this starts out with just enough honey to bring it to just over 5%. And then I ferment it with a mixed culture that I've been propagating for the last 3 or so years. Originally, it came from a cider. I made a wild cider just for fun, and it turned out awesome. So I've been propagating this since then. And I mean, I don't know why, but you can still, I think, get a lot of that green apple character. And it's very bright, it's very tart.
Color too.
Definitely session mead. And like all of my other meads, it's all Vermont honey.
Awesome.
Cheers.
As we do, a toast. Oh, that is tasty. Nice, light, not overpowering in any way. It's like a gateway into this.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lawnmower mead.
Lawnmower mead.
I mean, it's it's good any time of year, but especially in the summer, you get one of these. It's super chill and chill but playful.
No tartness, no overpowering punchiness or anything.
Right.
And you mentioned the green apple, I was expecting more tartness, but there's just barely any. So
yeah. I mean, I do describe it that way. I tell people it's tart, it's kind of zippy, but it's not overly astringent. I don't think. It's pretty easy going.
Fantastic.
Gateway mead.
So what's the mead story? What made you create Golden Rule?
Like any story, it's a long and winding road, but the shorter version, basically, I've worked at various breweries in my fairly young career. I'm 32 now, started in the industry right after college. I actually got a job washing dishes in the pub of this brewery in Boulder Beer Company. And, one thing led to another. I moved east, continued working in upstate New York, and then got a job at Otter Creek Brewing Company here in Middlebury. At that point, that was my first full-on brewing gig. So I was full-time production brewing, and I didn't really have the energy to make beer at home. I love writing recipes. I love trying recipes. I've got, I don't know if cameras are picking up, but a lot of variety here. And that's not even, half of it. So it's a passion of mine to try all these different ingredients, work with all these different things. But like I said, I didn't have the energy to make beer at home. It's a 7-8 hour process. So I looked into other alternative fermentations to keep things bubbling and found mead. Sacred herbal healing beers, we love it. Kind of got me interested, and I tried mead, loved that it was, an hour and you were done and cleaned up. And the more I worked with it, the more I found it was a really lovely medium to work with these ingredients. Beer is great for whatever you want. Anything you can use in mead, you can use in beer to great effect. But what was special to me about mead was the way that once you ferment the sugar away, which all of my meads are dry at this point, with no worthwhile exceptions. So once the sugar's all gone, whatever other flavors are left really shine through. There's not a lot to hide behind. Whereas, with beer, you've got the malt and the hops, and just sort of by their nature, they're going to compete for that, perceptual space. So mead, on the other hand, especially on the lighter side, I've pretty much never, I very rarely venture past like 10% alcohol. So I'm on the lighter side of things, and that really just lets the flavors speak for themselves. Tea, I'm a big tea drinker, so using tea, using botanicals, flowers, just like lilacs. You know, it's like you got to pack a beer full of lilac to taste that thing. Whereas with mead, you really start to get you don't have to use too much, which is useful in its way. So.
I mean, you mentioned the 7-8 hour day. As a show, we followed a home brewer for day, and it's like, how are we going to cut that down to an hour episode? Because it's boil the water, cool the water, pull the drink down, and then put in the yeast. And
right.
So you just mentioning mead is like an hour. Sounds incredibly more convenient.
Definitely. And, you can make it as complicated as you want it. I'm usually making a tea first, either literally using tea or, steeping something hot. To extract the character before cooling it down to mix in the honey. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a simpler process, requires a lot less equipment than beer making. So, I still love good, well-made beer. That's my favorite kind of beer, is a well-made beer,
There's not much loss for that in the state of Vermont from what I've seen. So.
It's a pretty good place to be for that. Yeah.
It is pretty amazing how I think you're the least amount of population for the state of all the lower 48, yet you have per capita the most breweries. So.
Yeah, right. We don't have to have a lot of breweries to get that number, but it's a competitive scene. It really, Vermont is a pretty crafty state, and so between its sort of maple sugaring and dairy heritage, there was kind of already a lot of that equipment available. It sort of sets the stage.
And then what made you decide, clearly time saving, but also what made you decide mead's going to be my game?
When I made that decision, I had actually been fired from Otter Creek. Don't let that stop you. Getting fired is not the end of the road. So they, let me go. I briefly worked at a local winery, Lincoln Peak. Shout out. And then Fiddlehead picked me up.
Okay,
So I worked at Fiddlehead for 2 years, 1 year on the day shift, 1 year on the night shift, which I volunteered for, and they took care of me. I had a very good experience working at Fiddlehead. Obviously a lot of great beer coming out of there. It wasn't too long into my night shift stint where, you get a lot of time to think to yourself on the night shift. And I was kind of wondering, what am I doing here? At Fiddlehead, great company to work for, but, on the night shift is all about efficiency. So, what I was doing there, more or less, was keeping the beer engine turning. Just making sure that more and more people could get IPA. And Fiddlehead IPA is a worthwhile, is a beer worth drinking. But yeah, I was, interested in adding a little bit more to the conversation than more IPA, which is if we need anything, it's not more IPA right now. And yeah, I mean, just circumstances kind of aligned such that I was able to make the decision, in retrospect, a little recklessly, but I decided nonetheless to let them know my intentions to start this meadery. I guess as a little caveat, whatever, I didn't really get into or, decide to start a mead company because I am passionately in love with mead. I didn't really get into mead making, like I said earlier, because I, tried a bunch and just thought it was the greatest thing in the world. I got into it because I thought it was interesting, on its own merits as a, basically on honey's merits as a fermentable sugar. I mean, the way that you asked the question, this is my game. Well, it's not a lot of people in the game right now. Yeah. By the time that I decided to start Golden Rule Mead, I was drinking my homebrewed mead at least as often as I was drinking the Fiddlehead mead that I was bringing home, beer that I was bringing home. And that was a real sign for me. Okay, if I like this well enough to drink it, probably someone else will too.
It does seem like your entire career, from what you're telling me, is pretty much in the craft beverage industry.
Yeah.
Starting in Colorado till you came New York here.
Yeah.
But what made you pull the trigger on moving east from kind of central mountain?
Yeah. There's not much of an answer there, other than my family had moved east. I grew up in Colorado. We moved there, I was 4.
Okay.
So I grew up there and moved back there after college to work at Boulder Beer Company. Meanwhile, my brother had been living overseas for a few years and had moved back to New York City.
Okay.
Moved to New York City. My parents live in upstate New York, so I left Boulder Beer Company and decided to. I decided east or west. I was really down to the wire. Like a week left, I still hadn't decided, am I going to move east, be closer to my family, or I had a buddy in San Francisco at the time. He was a software developer, and he lived right in the city, like on Golden Gate Park. He had this great apartment, and I was like, can I crash on your couch while I look for something in the industry there? He was open to it. Ultimately, I decided to move east, and no regrets. I'm very happy to have wound up here.
And from what I've read and from your recipes, you have some pretty unique meads. Sometimes you want something nice and dry and not as heavy as a wine. And so to me, mead is a happy middle ground of that big or small, depending what I want. Ciders, there's the common misconception that ciders are just like dry and puckery and this, but that's, having just come off Mountain Mac, he completely changed my mind on that.
Sure.
So it's great that there's more local beverage producers in where we live, thankfully, from like Ontario, Quebec, the Maritimes, Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, New York State. We're pretty spoiled for all the tasty beverages that we could get. So
yeah,
but to me, there needs to be more meads. My apologies, because it's the Viking drink, and I'm sporting this. I gotta be drinking meads. So
right. I mean, as far as getting into it, and I don't know, the variety. Mead can be a lot of things. I mean, like you said, it can be big or small. Mead is right now. People think of it as that. A lot of people, I think the common perception is, the common association is with Norsemen with frothing mugs of whatever, and it's kind of a medieval European drink, and that's all well and good, but that's really only part of mead's heritage. I mean, I haven't done much research here, but as far as I would be willing to put money on, any culture around the world that has had honey, like a reliable supply of honey, has been making mead, and that's basically everywhere except the Americas.
That's us too in Canada.
Well, right. I mean, after Europeans brought honeybees to North America. So that's, a much shorter heritage. Mead is thousands and thousands of years. People ask, like, was it discovered? Right? Who discovered, who invented mead? Or it's like, it's prehistoric, I think. Like other fermented beverages. We came up with them.
There's a documentary I watched, like How Beer Saved the World. And it's like the first fermentable beverage makers were women, but now it's like such a dude culture thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, we gotta deviate from that. And craft alcohol, there's too much of a stigma where like ciders and wines are for ladies and then men drink beer, and we need to get away from that and just enjoy what you're gonna enjoy, and it's that simple. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a thing that's happening pretty broadly socially right now. I mean, a lot of questioning of roles, and I don't know, roles don't come from nowhere, but it's. I think, mead or craft beverages are kind of a microcosm of this, and what I really hope that people come away with when they come to visit the tasting room or even just pick up a bottle of mead with a certain preconceived notion of what it will be, and then drink my mead and just hear regularly from people like, oh, this is not what I expected. That mead can be a lot of different things, and that maybe there are certain certain flavor profiles that mead really does support, more naturally. So there are certain things that beer is more going to do and mead is more going to do. So in its way, kind of these roles.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a thing that we all get to do. We're all doing in this way of breaking out of these traditions to re-examine them, and then kind of move them around on the shelf of life.
Yeah. Yeah, there's all that shelf space. I mean, why not?
There's all that shelf space.
Support your local beverage makers.
We got to fight for that shelf space.
Could I try something else?
Of course. Yeah. So let's see. We've got some options. I don't know, currants or cherries?
Cherries.
Cherries.
Yeah.
So Foxtrot. Foxtrot gets.
Foxtrot. That's a great name.
Thanks. Sour cherries, lovage root, and clove.
Okay.
And you're going to notice, of course, fruitiness from the cherries, but it's really the clove and the lovage root, I think, that sort of take center stage.
Oh, that's tasty. Yeah, the clove's a little over the cherry from what I'm getting on my palate, but still, wonderful. About 5%, 6%.
This one's a little over 8, I think.
Oh,
maybe
wow.
8.5.
Don't taste it.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah. They are pretty clean.
Yeah. Bottles you're using, super unique. They remind me of back in the day, the stubby beers.
Yeah, right.
Kind of
Red
what made you
Stripe kind
pick
of thing.
those and not canning or the bigger bottles.
The choice was more made for me, or as much made for me as one that I made. These were bottles that originally I got this brown bottle here, not this very one, obviously, for a birthday present.
Okay.
Girl I was dating at the time liked one of my recipes, Corey Rose, which we can taste, of course. Gets coriander and rosemary, and she wanted a gallon of it for her birthday. She's not a very big person, nor is she a big drinker, so I wanted smaller bottles. The smallest bottle that I had was a 12-ounce bottle, and I was like, yeah, that might be a little more than she wants in a sitting. So I ordered the smallest quantity I could get I found, these 8-ounce Boston rounds. Smallest quantity I could get was 96 bottles. So I got this case of 96 resealable Boston rounds, and they were awesome for home brewing, easy to clean out and reuse the caps and everything. But more than that, they allowed me, once I actually started this business. Originally, when I started this business, I wanted everything on draft. So, of course, I had to bring samples to the restaurants and the bars that I wanted to pour my stuff at, and I brought them in these. I had these bottles handy, so I would fill little bottles and bring them. And I got several. Often, they would ask me, "Is this how you're selling it?" No, it's on draft. And more often than not, I would hear, "Well, it would be easier if we could pick up, just a case of these," and then the pandemic hit. So I already had this positive feedback about the bottles, and I started selling at farmers markets. Lugging kegs around was miserable. And then all the bars and restaurants, they weren't going to put mead on draft. Those who didn't just shut down their alcohol program, they wanted sure things that they were gonna move, which I don't fault them for at all.
Yeah, no. The pandemic hit everybody a little different, and the fact that guys like you, Mount Mac, Groenville, all you guys survived.
It's pretty miraculous.
2 years of hell, pretty much. It's amazing.
Yeah, thank you, government funding. Socialism works. I'm
in a house drinking mead. How'd you pick this location?
That's a great question. I don't really, there's no coherent answer, I think. I was picking between a few different areas. Of course, first it was deciding on the town.
Yeah.
Middlebury versus I was also considering Montpelier and, of course, the Burlington area. Those were my big three. And that same girl I was dating, she lived in Middlebury, so lacking any spot that I really fell in love with in either of the other two areas. I was looking in Middlebury and found this house, which is, definitely part of the sort of idiosyncrasy of this project. living upstairs. The living room, the main floor is the tasting room.
Yeah.
And I make it all downstairs. And that was really part of the deal. I knew that I just didn't have enough money to pay for an apartment and a commercial space. So I needed all in one, and most of the other spaces that were available and like zoned for this kind of project, they didn't have a shower. So like, what was I gonna do? And then a friend introduced me to this space, and the rent was pretty reasonable, especially like because it's all in one, and there's an actual apartment upstairs, and yeah, I mean, working out the zoning with the town was, obviously feasible. So it all sort of came together, and I don't know if this is going to be Golden Rule Mead's forever home. Might outgrow it, we'll see, but for now it's great.
City of Middlebury is very welcoming you opening this location. Another, craft producer. Obviously, the city's like, ooh, tax money, but
yeah. It was a little bit of a dance because it's not an industrial zone. Of course, we are bordering an industrial zone. Exchange Street, just north here. There's like Woodchuck and Otter Creek. Well, Otter Creek is no longer there now, but Whistle Pig, I think, is going to be moving in. So it was kind of a border case, and we sort of finagled it to. It's very small production. I'm not going to turn this house into a beverage plant, I will move out long before that's an issue.
No, but it's perfect. Like, to me, it feels very natural, and like, I could come down here, just sit down and have a tasty mead of yours and just kind of like chill out. Feels like a very relaxing type of place. A lot of local art.
Yeah. What
made you decide to support local artists and sell their art here?
I mean, it's definitely just part of the vision. Getting, why there's so much local art out there, and there's a lot of really good stuff. Now, the art that mostly adorns the walls here is really primarily the work of one artist, a local, named Alice Eccles. Alice, thank you. She's very talented, prolific, and multimedia artist. I guess she writes and has a whole like clothing line that she just started during the pandemic. She like gets these. I think they're made in Canada, actually. Fairly paid laborers, and it's cool material. And she gets her art like printed on them. But yeah, the art here, I don't really run like a gallery per se, or there's no rotation to it for now. That's not something that I wanted to get into, is like sourcing, making sure different artists are always like moving in and out. And I wanted a more consistent vibe here. So, and Alice's work, the character of it, I think suits my, like what I'm going for perfectly. There's a nice balance between abstract and representational, and there's like bright colors, but it's just this really diverse portfolio of sort of styles, and it's all a little bit whimsical. And I couldn't have been luckier. She approached me about doing. Vermont has this open studio weekend twice a year, fall and spring. And so she approached me, I think in fall of the pandemic, first fall of 20, about using this space for Open Studio Weekend, because her studio is her home, and she didn't really want people at that point coming to her home. But that was my business, so I was totally open to it. And yeah, all the pieces are for sale, and all proceeds go to Alice, because I get a bunch of free art in the meantime. So that's her.
I'm assuming, having the open art studio here is people are consuming your mead.
Right.
And your mead's getting out there to people who might not have tried it before.
Yeah.
So it's really good, I like using the word simpatico. It really kind of gels together with you and her. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Love hearing that. Golden Rule. Why did you call it Golden Rule?
The name originally came to me one evening, one long day of kegging. It was the place I was working in upstate New York. My supervisors were teaching a course at Paul Smith's on brewing, And what that meant was that they got to trek out to Lake Placid a couple of times a month, and I think it was once a week at that point, and teach their course, and then go hang out at Lake Placid Pub and Brewery and drink ubu and have a great time while I was, meanwhile, holding on the fort. And I had this like 15-hour long day of kegging, like start to finish, set up, do the kegging, warehouse it, clean CIP everything. And I was just like in the middle of that, feeling kind of exploited and not treated very well. And I'm like, what happened to treating others the way you want to be treated? Like when I start a place, I'm gonna, live by the golden rule. And it just clicked for me, like, oh, Golden Rule Brewing Company. At the time, I hadn't started making mead. Golden Rule Brewing Company, that's a pretty good name. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, as my interest in mead grew, the whole golden thing, it's like very fitting.
Yeah, honey's gold.
Right.
So.
Not all the meads are gold, of course, but the starting material, definitely gold, and of course the parallel between honey and gold as like this imperishable thing is wonderful. And I think it's hopefully, ideally, it's a way of keeping myself honest, holding myself to this principle, which is, not the end all be all of ethics, but it's a good start.
Yeah. You seem pretty much mostly a solo operation this time, so it's the fact that you actually took time in your schedule to speak with us today. Your meadery is awesome. So.
It's really my pleasure. Yeah. And can I pour you another?
Yes, I was actually about to ask you that.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, either Corey Rose or Twig. Corey Rose is that one I mentioned earlier with coriander and rosemary, or Twig gets actually as much maple syrup as honey and 2 kinds of tea. It's got this nice balance.
As Canadian, I got to do the maple syrup.
Got to do it.
It is that season right now while we're doing this is the sugar shacks are about to start having more and more people in
and they did in January. I mean, it's just been such a crazy like not even January thaw, but like spring.
A toast.
Cheers.
Yeah. That's incredibly balanced.
Yeah.
It's like just a little bit of the sugariness in the maple.
And there's a tea. Well, there are 2 kinds of tea. Like I said, this was actually one of my earliest recipes. It's changed a little, especially because I use that native yeast strain. Actually, Foxtrot got it too. Yeah, I use it in a lot of my meads. Ferment wild. My advice: ferment wild. Like mess around with that. Commercial yeast strains are great, but like wild fermentation is where we came from. All yeasts were originally wild. Mess around. It doesn't mean it's better necessarily, but you get these gems. You get lucky.
Yeah.
And serendipity is just like feeds the soul. I don't know.
Do you suggest any type of food and mead pairings? I'm guessing you don't have a kitchen at this time. Don't know if there's one in the plans, but
not here. Okay. I was like, I have a kitchen in my apartment.
Yeah. We'll go make some nachos. Bring them down.
Right. I think the answer is basically it depends on the mead. So we've had 3 very different meads so far, so I would pair them quite differently. Wild light, not to get too specific. I think like anything, like wine, like beer, you're gonna want to think about the flavors that are going on. And more than the flavors, the feel, this dreaded word, mouthfeel, dreaded mostly by my family. My brother just can't get over it. It's great, and I love him. And it's just important, I don't know, to let the beverage pick its pairing. It's part of in French. There's this great word that kind of sounds like disgusting, but it's not. You guys are from Quebec. Degustation.
Degustation, yeah.
So, like, to deguste, to really, it's a very like rooting word to like put your roots into the, I don't know why, but it's just how it strikes me. In more common parlance these days, to drink mindfully.
Yeah. It's so going into that, in Quebec, it's instead of a flight, it's a palette de dégustation. So
nice.
Yeah, it's literally a tasting flight.
Yeah, right. And dégustation is so much better of a word than tasting. Tasting, like déguste is like to really take it in, let it.
So we've traveled from Quebec to here. Are you starting to get that French accent in here occasionally? You're like, oh, I recognize that.
Every now and then.
Oh, we're getting Canadians back up here again. I know the border's been open 6 months now, kind of solidly, but how does it feel to like have tourists coming through and who have discovered you? Like, how does that feel?
Feels great.
Yeah. It sounds like you opened kind of just before the pandemic and then pandemic.
Right. Well, yeah. I started the company in 2019.
Okay.
And then I moved in here. I moved into this house March 1st of 2020. And of course, 2 weeks later, the Americas locked down. And that was quite a time to be alive, let alone starting a business. Still is. But it's gotten, I don't know, it's been just an adjustment. I mean, starting a business, if you're not paying attention, you're going to go under. So you're constantly just trying to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening and how you're going to move with it, what you're going to move with, what you're not going to move with. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, as far as tourism goes, tourists are, I'd say, probably about half of who I see in the tasting room, whether they're Canadian or from just
New York, New
south
Hampshire.
of here, right? And so I'm always grateful for the tourist visit.
And for those who come through, have a few of your meads, buy a couple of bottles, friends in the area that they have to check out as well.
You just came from Mountain Mac. He's getting started in the area, and he's starting out, so he doesn't have a whole lot of variety right now. But I think what he has pulled the trigger on releasing, it's really solid stuff. It's dry. It's very drinkable. And then, I mean, outside of alcohol, Middlebury has a lot to offer. There's Stoneleaf Tea House. I will always stand Stoneleaf Tea House. It was like when I moved to Middlebury, that was my first second home. I have spent so much time there. Wonderful place, world-class tea house. Montrealers know your own, I think it's Camellia sinensis. It's just like this beautiful tea house in the middle of Montreal. Okay. I think Stoneleaf totally stacks up, and their selection is, the owner, founder, he travels to the tea growing regions and connects with the growers, sort of gets a feel for their operation, develops these direct relationships. So he really just gets the freshest stuff, and gets to make sure that he believes in how it's made, and they take their craft seriously, but it's not a pretentious place. It's just very authentic and laid back, and was a big inspiration for this project.
Amazing.
And they are right down the road from me. I think anyone who visits Middlebury owes Stoneleaf Tea House a visit.
I mean, hearing your kind of craft beverage adventure seems everything along the 7 from what you've said. So
yeah, right. And continuing down 7, there's a beer spot that I just have to recommend. Red Clover Ale Company. Okay. Founded by 3 guys, great guys. They know their craft. They do a lot of great stuff. Anyone who loves a good stout, if they have their stout on, that's what like really, when they were just starting out, kind of dialing in their like fermentations. I'm not a big IPA fan anyway, so I like tried one, and then I tried their stout, and it was like dead on. And I was like, this is just straight ahead stout. You don't find that much. Yeah. And they nailed it. Red Clover is great spot.
Cool. Let's try one more, and then I only have a couple of questions left. So.
Sure. I think I'm going to have you try Love Potion.
Perfect. This is just after Valentine's Day. This episode will be out. So.
Yeah, and it's a really special one.
Amazing.
Love Potion number D. Red raspberries, a little bit of black raspberries, some Chinese black tea from where else? Stoneleaf Tea House. And it just, the aroma... Pure raspberry.
Toast.
Cheers.
Oh. Yeah, that's dancing on my palate.
It does that.
What's the ABV on this, if you don't mind?
8.
Oh, okay. 8%. Yeah, So not too many of these in a row.
That's another really beautiful thing that I've found about mead. I'm not trying to encourage binge drinking here, but like anything dry. I think anything is not mead specific, though I think the honey does affect this property. It's a lighter hangover. I mean, it really, if the less sugar in your beverage, the lighter the hangover. This is common knowledge. And yeah, I mean, that definitely drew me to my own stuff as I was homebrewing it. What I mean, just like you let it dry out, and then you can drink it at night and, in the morning after your night shift. And then you wake up and you're not, there's no real fog. It's the sugar. I mean, alcohol, yes, but it's the sugar that gets you. I think I've also had customers tell me that it's like kind of the only thing they can drink. Not everyone, obviously, but some of my regulars, they really appreciate the dryness. Of course, it's naturally gluten-free. And the other ingredients I'm using, try to use organic, local, wherever possible.
So where do you obtain your honey? I'm assuming as much local as you can?
Yeah, all local. For now, I'm doing all Vermont honey. Not because there's anything like particularly special about Vermont honey, just, supporting local beekeepers, keeping food miles down. As I grow, I don't want to push any of my beekeepers to to like compromise on their practices. I really I try to buy from beekeepers who low to no chemical intervention. So I don't want to push them into places that where they have to cut corners. So I'll be looking at other local sources: New York, New Hampshire, Massachusetts. It's all honey. It's all great.
Yeah.
As long as it's properly produced.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask you then, you're clearly very busy, but let's say you're able to hire somebody to take over for like a week or two, and you could go on either a mead or kind of craft beverage based vacation. Where are you going?
A week or two? Is that all I get? It's been so long.
Let's say 2 weeks for sure.
2 weeks. Yeah. So, I had the distinct privilege of getting to visit Normandy growing up. I would go there with my family. My dad's French, so we would go there, and Norman cider was the first thing I ever got drunk on at the ripe old age of 10 years old. Not trying to dox
That's
my
Europe,
parents
though.
here, but right.
It's totally cool there. I mean, beer at McDonald's, like.
And Norman cider, man, it goes down so easy. So I'd love to go back there. Yeah, I'd be interested to see about other meads. Although really, I think if I wanted to learn about honey wine, I'd be at least as interested in going and visiting Ethiopia and like learning about Tej. At least as interested in that. Of course, I think there's a civil war. I don't want to misspeak here, but like there's been some tension there.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
and the other option isn't much better given the proximity to Ukraine, Poland, and the Czech Republic. I actually visited Prague once, and that I didn't know about mead at that point. But yeah, I've heard a lot about their mead, the history there. Be pretty interested to check them out.
What's next for Golden Rule as a brand?
That's a good question. What's next for the brand? I think, right now, last year, about this time, I had just started working with a local distributor, Vermont Wine Merchants. They've been instrumental in helping me grow this business. I mean, it's just like made just an enormous improvement on all fronts. So thank you, Vermont Wine Merchants. Speaking of which, you can find Golden Rule Mead throughout Vermont, anywhere that Vermont Wine Merchants delivers to, which is a lot of places. One of the reasons I started working with them. So we'll continue, introducing the mead to new accounts. And continue experimenting with varieties. Of course, that's what I love doing. But outside of that, for your podcast listeners, I am planning to start direct to consumer shipping within the United States. I haven't looked into what it would take to get into Canada.
super complicated.
That's what I assumed. So like, sorry to the Canadian listeners. I don't think that's going to happen.
Vermont's right here.
And I'm not going to do all of the U.S. either. I mean, limited states, because you have to pay for every permit. And some are like $50, some are $500. So it's like, I'm going to do that. So there will be limited shipping opening up over the next few months. And I'll be announcing that via social media. You can find me Golden Rule Mead, just all one word, Golden Rule Mead. Online, I really don't post very much. I probably should post more. I kind of loathe social media, and it's a love-hate.
It's needed.
Yeah.
So. And for those who want to visit Golden Rule, let them know where they can find you.
Here in Middlebury, Vermont, 8 Elm Street, because Google will take you here. Yeah, it's just a house. So if it doesn't look like a business, you found it.
Caught me off guard.
And the little driveway. There is some parking. There's not a lot to it.
Yeah. Plus, you mentioned in your phone call, your neighbors across the street are okay if people park there to come over and consume. More or less.
Right. I mean, especially after they close, I think that's fine. We've got a garage and a grocery store, so like I'm open Friday through Monday, so I am open on Mondays usually. Check Google, check Yelp, and I say I mean like it's just a one-man show. 2 to 8 p.m.
Okay.
So earlier in the afternoon, probably use my parking lot. Later on, I mean, it's not, you're not going to be competing for a parking space, like realistically.
Yeah.
It's not a terribly busy spot.
Amazing. And you said Golden Rule Media for pretty much all social media.
Yeah. Golden Rule Mead. I don't even have a Facebook. It's really just Instagram and the website, which is www.goldenrulebrew.com.
So all that's going to be in the show notes. As for us, allbeerinside.com is the website. At allbeerinside on all social media. And as I say at the end of all episodes, drink craft, not crap.